Welcome to Free Friday Frights. This is Friday, June 1st, and because it's a fiction week, I'm going to be reading a story called Distractions, which is a cautionary tale about following a self-help guide too literally. It's about a distracted writer who's having trouble writing, and he's just looking for a way to eliminate distractions. Unfortunately, he takes things a little bit too far. Now, this was a story that originally was published in get this, a CD-ROM back in 2001. It was for the World Fantasy Convention, and Nancy Kilpatrick, a Canadian vampire writer, was the editor of that, and wrote the story, and it first appeared there, and then it was reprinted in One Hand Screaming in 2004. It was the first time it was in print. And then I redid it in the chapbook-themed bookstore, bookish-themed stories. And that's what I'm going to read from because the print is slightly larger in this one. It'll be a little bit easier for these aged eyes to see. So this, without further ado, is Distractions. Maxwell, let me try that again because, you know, I just kind of blurted out the words there. Let's try it. We'll just, yeah, here we go. Distractions by Mark Leslie. Maxwell wasn't surprised when the rubber ball smashed through the window and rolled to a stop near his feet. In fact, he hardly flinched as the shards of glass flew through the air, some of them nesting in his blonde, curly locks. He'd known it was only a matter of time before the ball being bounced against the side of the house strayed just enough to hit the window. Maxwell looked down at the signed copy of Andy Robinson's latest self-help bestseller, Maxim Power 2, Getting Through Distractions. Andy's proud, smiling face with his unique trademark, oversized cleft chin and dimples on the cover brought the book's first words to his mind. Distractions can be seen as evil. Calmly, Maxwell picked up the ball and walked out of the study. The ball was made of Indian rubber, warm and hard with just a little give as he pressed his thumb into it. Tossing the ball into the air and then catching it with the same hand, he headed down the hall on his way to the door. The packed bookshelf at the end of the hall caught his eye, as it often did. He paused to run the tips of his fingers across the spines of the books. His fingers stopped on a book with golden lettering down the spine reading The Brazen Herald. He pulled the book off the shelf, admiring the cover lettering, the artwork, the dark winged dragon silhouette against a purple-red sky, and below that, a blue-black sea, and a lone figure standing in the foreground on the edge of the cliff, mostly in silhouette, the blue and yellow tunic showing, the glinting shine of the sword in hand. Turning the hardcover book in his hand, he admired the black and white photo on the back, how the smiling face captured there resembled him, yet was different. A fuller head of hair, the confident smile of an author still producing. Then he read the text. Maxwell Brawny lives with his wife Doris in Arizona and is hard at work on his next novel, furthering the chronicles of Sebastian Eldritch. He smiled and fondly remembered those days. The novel had been praised and cheered. He had been the talk of the town, described as that up-and-coming fantasy writer from the Southwest, the way that King was the horror writer from New England. He'd been interviewed and featured in all the major science fiction and fantasy journals. That, of course, had been 5 years ago. He still hadn't finished the follow-up novel about Sebastian Eldritch, the one he had been planning on calling Herald in Peril. No, between that first blockbuster novel and now, he'd gone through 2 job changes, the loss of his father, a near divorce, and a house fire. Getting back to working on his novel had not been a priority during those changes. The world around you shouldn't decide your priorities for you. Only you can do that. Until he discovered Andy Robinson, that was, and learned that all of it, all the changes, turmoil, and upset was really nothing more than distractions that had been getting in the way of fulfilling his destiny. He'd bumped into Andy at RockCon, a science fiction convention in Little Rock, just a few months ago. Maxwell was still touring the conventions, riding on his one past publishing success and hoping he'd revitalize his career by being around other successful authors. He'd ended up reminding himself of a certain television star from 20 years ago whose sole quest seemed to be to work nonstop at rallying fans at conventions to help bring back Starship Academy, despite the fact that most of the other main cast members from that series had either all but disappeared from acting or had died. Minutes after making that realization and wondering if he would be doing this for another 15 years, he'd gotten off the elevator at the wrong floor where he'd stumbled into a business leaders convention and Andy Robinson, the convention's main speaker. Across from the elevators and just outside the lecture room, Andy was involved in an animated discussion with one of the men in suits surrounding him. The way he moved, gestured, the passion and excitement in his voice caught Maxwell's attention immediately. Andy actually reminded Maxwell of a character in his novel, the one faithful companion of Sebastian Ulrich, Marvis Cranley, who was a sometimes sidekick, sometimes court jester, and full-time spiritual advisor. He started watching Andy because of this fascinating parallel, but then continued watching him because he was such a captivating speaker. When Andy and the two men, who were listening to him with rapt attention, moved down the hall, Maxwell spotted the poster board bearing Andy's grin and a table covered with a man's motivational books. The phone began to ring, bringing him out of his short reminiscence. Maxwell turned and regarded the phone, answering machine, and a key cup on a small table near the front door. You can only deal with one distraction at a time. Don't let them gang up on you. He slid the novel back into place on the shelf between The Armies of Daylight by Barbara Hamley and Frostwing by Richard A. Knack, two of his favorite fantasy authors. The answering machine picked up after the second ring. Hi, sweetie. His mother's voice, slightly tinny coming through the answering machine speaker, filled the hallway. I'm just worried because I haven't heard from you in a couple of days. Call me. Damn woman, he thought, continuing his journey down the hallway, making him call her twice a week, as if there were anything important to discuss that often. What a waste of time. Without breaking stride, Maxwell ripped the phone cord out of the wall and carried the unit out the door. In the entranceway, he lifted the lid off the trash can and dropped the phone inside. I'm busy, Mom, he said as he snuggled the lid back into place. I'll deal with you later. Put aside those distractions until you have the time to deal with them. Maxwell then rounded the house. In the front yard, a red-haired kid with a speckling of freckles across his nose stood waving his arms in the air. It was the neighbor's kid, Danny. Sorry, Mr. Bronte, I'm so sorry. Reaching the boy, Maxwell stopped. Danny, what did I say about throwing the ball against the side of my house? Danny didn't answer. Danny, what did I say? The boy shifted his left foot in front of his right one, softly digging a toe into the grass as he looked up. You said not to. Not to what? Not to throw the ball against the house because it distracts you when you're... That's right, Maxwell said, cutting the child off. And you disobeyed me again. I'm sorry, Mr. Bronte. I'm sorry. Can I have my ball back? As Maxwell stood there looking at the boy, he was reminded of the fact that this distraction was taking up even more of his time. Andy Robinson's smooth, calm voice of reason filled his head. Distractions are anti-traction. You must give yourself traction by eliminating distraction. Eliminate distraction, Maxwell mumbled. You want your ball? Here! He drew his arm back, and with that, the boy immediately stopped sobbing. He started to stumble backwards, his wide eyes never leaving the ball as Maxwell followed through on his pitch and sent the ball straight at the boy's head. The ball bounced off the boy's forehead, the shock more than anything dropping him to the ground on his backside. And stay out of my yard! The boy turned, scrambled forward about a foot on his hands and knees, then got to his feet and ran across the yard to the neighbor's house. After watching the boy run inside and hearing the satisfying slam of the door, Maxwell stood there a moment, taking in a breath of fresh air, carried on a warm, dry desert wind. Then he headed back into the house. Oh, great, he said, noticing the grass stains on his hand that must have come from the ball. Running out of time here. Andy's voice came to him again. Time is your friend, not your enemy. Embrace it. Make the most of it. He glanced at his watch as he headed toward the bathroom. He only got one day off a week to work on his writing, and so far he'd been wasting it with minor distractions. But as he now knew, there was no such thing as a minor distraction. Every single distraction is evil and must be dealt with, or they will soon stockpile and run your life. For the past 5 years, he'd let distractions get in his way, preventing him from getting anything accomplished. They'd stockpiled in front of him. Job interviews, funerals, marriage counselors, distractions with capital letters, all of them, preventing him from getting down to his novel. But not anymore. Not with the sound words of Andy Robinson to inspire him along. When Maxwell got to the washroom, he turned on the water, not bothering to wait for the hot water to start coming on. No, that would be a waste of time. He smiled at himself in the mirror as he washed his hands. The new Maxwell smiled back at him. Say goodbye to the you that says, perhaps I'll do it later, and say hello to the you that says, I want it right now. The new Maxwell didn't procrastinate and thought of time as his best friend, because time was too powerful to work against. Hey, that was a good one. He just made that one up on his own. Not only was Maxwell taking charge of his life, but he was able to rework Andy's strong and powerful words into his own life. After all, it was Andy who said, don't just follow these tips blindly. Take them, use them as your own, and they will evolve into your own words, your own tips, your own maxims. Still smiling, Maxwell felt something soft and furry rubbing up against his leg. He looked down at an orange tabby, Smucker's, as it purred and wound back and forth between his legs. Maxwell's smile began to falter as it continued this pattern without pause. He knew it wouldn't stop until the animal was either fed or petted or perhaps both. In any case, it was just another distraction. Still smiling, Maxwell scooped the tabby up, carried it to the toilet, and forced its head under the water. Within a couple of minutes, the struggling was over, and he set the toilet lid back down, the cat's orange tail still sticking out. He'd been surprised that the feline hadn't put up more of a fight. Soon he would have to clean the body out of there, but he couldn't worry about that now. He had to remain focused on the job at hand. Prioritize your time. What is important? What can wait? As he washed his hands, Maxwell became aware of a stinging sensation on his left arm. He turned his wrist over and discovered that the cat must have indeed fought back at least a little. There on his skin was a puffed-up red scratch. The center of the scratch had opened and a thin line of blood leaked out. Not another distraction, Maxwell mumbled, opening up the medicine cabinet. Unable to find any bandages, he stormed into the hallway. The doorbell rang. Maxwell turned towards the door. On the other side of the screen door stood his neighbor, Gus Sherrington. Gus looked like a much older version of his son, Danny, complete with a thick patch of freckles across his nose. But his red hair had receded to nothing more than a patch of wispy tufts a few inches above each ear. The way he was breathing in big dramatic gasps and the look on the man's face suggested that Gus was none too happy that Maxwell had beamed his son with the Indian rubber ball. Gus raised a baseball bat where Max could see it. Get your ass out here! He screamed through the door. I'll kick your ass down the frickin' street for touching my boy! Distractions have a way of compounding themselves, becoming more than the sum of their parts. No kidding, Maxwell mumbled, stepping over to the closet. He opened the closet door and reached in for his shotgun. Eliminating distractions at any cost is often your only solution. Get your ass out here! Gus yelled again, unable to see Maxwell, checking to ensure the gun was loaded behind the cover of the closet door. I said, Gus started to say, but stopped as Max closed the closet door and revealed the gun. Gus's eyes were suddenly as wide as his son's had been when he knew he was going to be getting the ball back fast and hard. Stepping forward and raising the shotgun to chest level, Maxwell fired. The glass and the screen shattered in an explosive blast, and Gus was knocked backwards off his feet, almost as much from the sound as from the force hitting him in the chest. Maxwell stepped forward, looking at the man lying on the sidewalk on his back. His eyes, wide and terrified, were fixed on Maxwell. His chest, now hitching even more dramatically than before, was pretty much a stewed-up mess of blood, skin, pellets, and the remains of his yellow T-shirt. His right hand still clutched the baseball bat, and his left hand pawed at the grass as if it alone could drag him away from further pain. Distractions are often over before you stop being distracted by them. Could that be the case now? Certainly, Gus wasn't a distraction any longer. He should let him be. Maxwell turned and headed back down the hallway. A trickle of blood leaked down his forehead. He figured it must be a cut from the glass, either from the screen door just now or the glass that flew through the air when the ball had come through his window. Whatever it had been, it signaled a need for more bandages. He stumbled towards the master bedroom. "Doris, where are the..." He paused at the bedroom door. His wife was lying on the floor, her dead hand still clutching the vacuum cleaner. "Oh, yeah," Maxwell muttered, remembering. His wife had had the nerve to start vacuuming when she knew that he had a lot of work to get done. What a stupid thing to do. He was going to miss her. Strange how quickly he'd forgotten about killing her. Once you eliminate a distraction, you should forget it ever existed, or else it will consume your mind and your time. That is why distractions are so evil. That is why they must be vanquished. He decided enough time had been wasted. Without Doris around to help him find the bandages, he'd probably never locate them. He would really miss that. Instead, he headed back to his den. He sat in front of his computer, smiled as he propped the shotgun against his desk, and lifted his coffee, now cool, to his lips, and relished in the silence of the afternoon. Now that the distractions were removed, he could get some work done. After all, there was only so much time to write. Off in the distance, a wailing siren started to lurk up out of the silence. Unless it pertains to you directly, ignore anything that threatens to distract you. Deal with it only when it begins to directly interfere with your goal. Maxwell sent a sideways glance at the shotgun propped up against his desk, and then typed, figuring he could at least finish his next paragraph before the police car reached his house. As he typed, Andy Robinson's smiling face watched him proudly from the cover of the book. So that is the dark humor horror tale, Distractions. As you can tell, it's a cautionary tale about blindly following self-help guru. So Andy Robinson, just a few tidbits about the story. Andy Robinson is sort of meant to be like a Tony Robbins kind of figure. That was sort of my parallel there, and that's why I used the name, because it was somewhat familiar. And I did want to paint the main character, Maxwell, as almost as much of a victim as he is a bad guy. He's just a poor guy, poor slob who just wants to get the next novel written, and everything's gotten in his way, so he clings with desperation to the self-help guide, follows it blindly, of course. And again, I wanted to set up the fact that, is there something more going on? Is there some sort of supernatural presence that is taking him over in terms of this sort of cultish sort of behavior about distractions? That's kind of the gist of that story. I also made reference, it was kind of funny, I made reference to a TV star who was going around conventions and trying to bring back an old TV show. Now, at the time I wrote this, there was one of the original actors from Battlestar Galactica I kept seeing at science fiction conferences, and he was trying to bring this 70s TV show back to television. It was kind of like, dude, give it up. It was 20 years ago. Now, ironically, it was kind of funny because Battlestar Galactica, he did succeed. It did come to TV, and it was a huge success. But it was kind of, that was a cheeky reference to that there. And then there's another Easter egg in the story, which I thought might be interesting. And so Maxwell Bronte was the main character of this story, and I kind of like that name. So when I was writing the novel, Canadian Werewolf in New York, I used that name. So Michael Andrews is my main character in that, and he's a writer, and he writes a series of antiquarian, there's an antiquarian bookseller who happens to solve mysteries, and the name of the antiquarian bookseller, the hero in the novels that Michael has written, his name is Maxwell Bronte. And so I thought that would be a cute sort of cheeky reference that anyone who might have read Distractions and then also reads Canadian Werewolf in New York might go, wait a second, is Maxwell Bronte a writer who writes these kinds of fantasy novels, or is he a character that another writer writes about? So there's sort of this fun thing that I had played with. It was a fun story to put together. It was fun to put the to make those references, particularly because, having been a bookseller for years and years, I saw the trends in the industry as different self-help guides would just explode off the shelves, and everyone was quoting from them and stuff. And it's not all that different today. Of course, I did like that dark humor element of of what happens when things go wrong, when you blindly follow the self-help guide. I do see a comment, Julie. Will you read it again? I would love to read it again. My apologies, but what I'll do is I will end up re-editing the video and uploading it to YouTube, cutting out a few of the eerie mistakes that I made throughout the way. So my apologies that I'm not going to read it live again, but it will be in the feed that you can check out. So thanks for checking it out. You'll probably be disturbed. You'll probably go, oh my God, this guy is sick and twisted because he kills people. And that was the other thing, is in the progression of the story, because Maxwell loses it, I wanted to demonstrate the progression that a serial killer goes through. You know, sometimes you hurt bugs, and then you hurt small animals, and then you start to attack people, etc. And so even though the murders didn't happen in that order, the way that his disorder is revealed in the story, I tried to parallel that of a serial killer. And that's why you don't find out about Doris till afterwards, because I wanted to show that progression. Again, just probably a side effect of studying criminal psychology when I was in university. I wanted to kind of match that pattern. So that was Distractions. Now, Distractions is available in my book, One Hand Screaming. It's available in the digital chat book, Active Reader, and other cautionary tales from the book world. Now, if you're listening to this and you want, that was made into an audiobook, and this may be particularly useful for you, Julie, because you missed my reading of it. There's actually a professional narrator, Nick Barta, who's way, way better than I am at doing it, and he's the reader for it. And I do have some additional Audible coupon codes, so just let me know, and I'll fire one over to you, and then you can download. And you can not only get Distractions, you can listen to Nick reading Distractions, but you can also listen to Active Reader, the title story in that collection, as well as Browsers, all three lovely bookish tales by an amazing narrator, and that was put together for me by the good folks at Findaway Voices. And so I do have a handful of codes left. So if you're hearing this and you're curious, just email me, mark@markleslie.ca, or leave a comment here, and I can fire that coupon code to you directly, so you can then listen to a way better performance. Now, Nick's not wearing a Spider-Man shirt in that reading, and he doesn't have a skeleton hanging behind him on the wall, but you know, it still be okay. And because the story was set in Arizona, I should also go back to the fact that when I rewrote the story to submit it to Nancy for the World Fantasy Conference for 2001, the theme was writers from the Southwest. So I changed the setting, and I included references to writers that I knew would be at the conference. Again, I was trying to make it very self-reflective, and that's why I have Maxwell Bronte being a fantasy writer from the Southwest, and I mentioned Hambly and Knack and other writers in the story. Again, those are the things I specifically built in. And yes, I'm so excited that, you know, I can say I had a story published on CD-ROM. I actually had 3 stories published on CD-ROMs back in the day, because that was, I guess, prior to ebooks. That's what we considered digital publishing back in those archaic days. In any case, thanks for hanging out with me this Friday. Thanks for checking it out, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend. And I'm going to go, and now I'm going to turn the fan back on because it's really, really warm in here, almost like a dry Arizona heat, and open the window because someone was mowing their lawn in the background. And I'm going to get back to maybe wiping a little bit of the sweat off the brow. And then, of course, maybe I'm just going to treat myself by playing a Spider-Man video game or reading a Spider-Man comic. Maybe something like that. That's probably what I do. Hope you have a fantastic afternoon as well. Take care.